Around 12,800 years ago, something catastrophic happened to Earth. Ancient texts from civilizations separated by thousands of miles describe the same event. Fire from the sky, floods that swallowed continents, darkness that lasted for years. For centuries, scholars dismissed these stories as mythology, pure fiction, exaggerated tales passed down through generations. Then geologists found the evidence, a layer of sediment spanning the entire planet, dating to exactly 12,800 years ago, the same time the ancient texts described. The stories weren't myths, they were memories. The event is called the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, named after a flower that suddenly appeared across Europe during a period of rapid cooling. Between 12,800 and 11,600 years ago, Earth's climate changed dramatically. Temperatures dropped 15 degrees Celsius in some regions. Ice sheets that had been retreating began advancing again. Megafauna that had survived for millions of years went extinct within centuries. Woolly mammoths, saber-toothed cats, giant ground sloths, all gone. And then there are the texts. The Popol Vuh, the sacred book of the Maya, describes it clearly. The sky fell, the earth was submerged. A great flood came upon them. The face of the earth was darkened, and a black rain began to fall. The Epic of Gilgamesh from Mesopotamia tells a similar story. Utnapishtim describes the deluge. For 6 days and 6 nights the winds blew, torrent and tempest and flood overwhelmed the world. The Hindu text Mahabharata speaks of weapons that produced columns of smoke and flame as bright as 10,000 suns. The description matches nuclear detonations, but these texts predate modern weapons by thousands of years. Indigenous Australian oral traditions describe the same period. The Gunung people tell of stars falling from the sky, the land catching fire, water rising to cover the plains. The Hopi of North America speak of the Third World ending in flood and fire. Their ancestors escaped by climbing into hollow reeds and floating to safety. The Aztec Codex Chimalpopoca describes 4 previous worlds, each destroyed by catastrophe. The 4th world ended in water. The 5th, our current world, was said to begin after the sun moved and the earth shook. For decades, mainstream archaeology ignored these accounts. They were classified as flood myths, universal stories found in many cultures, but not based on real events. Just symbolic narratives about human sin and divine punishment. But the geological evidence changed everything. In 2007, a team of researchers led by Richard Firestone published findings that challenged conventional thinking. They discovered a boundary layer in sediment cores across North America. This layer contained unusual materials, nanodiamonds, microscopic particles that only form under extreme pressure and heat, spherules of melted rock, carbon spherules indicating massive wildfires, iridium concentrations higher than background levels. These materials suggested impact. Not a single asteroid, but a fragmented comet that broke apart in Earth's atmosphere. The debris field would have been enormous, fragments hitting ice sheets in North America. The impacts wouldn't leave massive craters because they struck ice, not bedrock. But they would have generated enough heat to melt billions of tons of ice instantly. The meltwater would have caused catastrophic flooding, sea levels rising rapidly, coastal settlements submerged, entire regions becoming uninhabitable within days. The Younger Dryas boundary layer has now been found on multiple continents: North America, Europe, Asia, South America. It's a global marker, proof that something affected the entire planet simultaneously. The timing matches the ancient text perfectly. 12,800 years ago. Right when the texts say the world changed. The evidence includes burned plant material, layers of ash indicating widespread fires, extinction of megafauna concentrated in this precise time frame, and climate proxies showing abrupt temperature drops. Some researchers argue the evidence is inconclusive, that the nanodiamonds could form through other processes, that the climate change was natural, not triggered by impact, that extinction patterns don't prove catastrophe. But the correlation is difficult to ignore. Ancient texts describe fire, flood, and darkness. Geological evidence shows impact materials, burned layers, and rapid climate change. Both point to the same moment in time, the same global event. The implications are staggering. If these texts are accurate records, not myths, then what else might they contain? Ancient civilizations possessed knowledge we're only now rediscovering. They observed celestial mechanics, tracked planetary cycles, understood that catastrophe could come from above. The Sumerians recorded astronomical events with precision. The Maya calculated planetary orbits centuries before European astronomers. The Egyptians aligned pyramids to stellar configurations that still confound researchers. Were these achievements simply impressive for their time, or evidence of inherited knowledge from an earlier, lost civilization? Graham Hancock has argued for years that an advanced global civilization existed before 12,800 years ago, that the Younger Dryas impact destroyed it, that survivors spread across the world, carrying fragments of their knowledge to isolated populations. That explains why megalithic structures appear on different continents with similar construction techniques, why flood myths exist in every culture, why ancient texts describe technologies that shouldn't exist in the Stone Age. Mainstream archaeology rejects this theory, calls it pseudoscience, argues there's no evidence of cities or infrastructure predating known civilizations. But absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. If a civilization existed on coastlines, their cities would now be underwater. Sea levels were 120 meters lower during the Ice Age. When the Younger Dryas impact melted ice sheets, millions of square kilometers of land disappeared beneath the ocean. Any coastal settlements would be submerged, buried under sediment, unreachable without deep-sea archaeology, and we've barely explored 5% of the ocean floor. The evidence could be there. We just haven't found it yet. Recent discoveries support this possibility. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, dated to 11,600 years ago, was built immediately after the Younger Dryas event. It's a massive stone temple complex created by people supposedly living in small hunter-gatherer groups. The engineering required to move 20-ton pillars and carve intricate reliefs suggests organizational capacity beyond what we attribute to that era. Who built it? Why? And where did they learn these techniques? The site was deliberately buried around 8,000 BCE. Someone spent enormous effort covering the entire complex with dirt. Why would they do that? Gunung Padang in Indonesia shows similar anomalies. Surface structures date to 2,000 years ago. But ground-penetrating radar reveals deeper layers, chambers and passageways buried beneath the surface. Core samples from these layers date to 20,000 years ago. That's 8,000 years before the Younger Dryas impact. If accurate, it means construction occurred during the last ice age, long before agriculture, cities, or organized civilizations supposedly existed. Mainstream archaeologists question the dating methods, argue that deeper layers are natural formations, but the geometric patterns in radar scans suggest intentional design. The ancient texts don't just describe catastrophe, they describe what came after. The Popol Vuh says the gods created a new race of humans after the flood. The survivors taught agriculture, astronomy, and architecture to these new people. The Egyptian texts speak of the first time, Zep Tepi, when gods walked among men and taught them civilization. The Sumerian king list records rulers who reigned for thousands of years before the flood, then much shorter reigns afterward. Were these records symbolic, or attempts to preserve history in the only way available? Oral tradition and sacred texts. Do you believe ancient texts preserve real memories of catastrophic events? The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis remains controversial. Not all scientists accept it. Some argue the evidence is misinterpreted, that nanodiamonds can form without impacts, that climate change was gradual, not sudden, that extinction patterns fit other models. But the correlation between texts and geology is undeniable. Cultures with no contact describe the same events: fire, flood, darkness. And the geological record shows exactly those conditions at exactly the time the texts indicate. If the texts are accurate, what else might they contain? The Rig Veda describes flying vehicles called vimanas. The Mahabharata details weapons that sound like modern missiles. The Egyptian Book of the Dead contains instructions for navigating the afterlife that some interpret as star maps. Are these metaphors, spiritual allegories? or distorted records of actual technology? We tend to assume ancient people were primitive, that they lacked our capabilities, but intelligence hasn't changed in 50,000 years. Only accumulated knowledge has changed. If a civilization reached high levels of development before 12,800 years ago, then lost everything in catastrophe, survivors would carry fragments, stories, techniques, ideas they couldn't fully replicate but desperately tried to preserve. The construction techniques at ancient sites suggest knowledge we've lost. The Egyptians cut granite blocks with such precision that modern tools struggle to match it. The stones at Pumapunku in Bolivia are carved with geometric accuracy, requiring advanced measurement tools. The Antikythera mechanism, recovered from a Greek shipwreck, is an astronomical calculator so complex it took decades to understand its function. Built in 100 BCE, it contains gear systems not seen again until medieval European clocks. How did they build it? Where did the knowledge come from? The device suggests a technological tradition stretching back further than we recognize. Ancient maps present another mystery. The Piri Reis map, created in 1513, shows the Antarctic coastline, not as it appears today, covered in ice, but as it would look without ice, detailed, accurate, matching modern surveys. Antarctica wasn't officially discovered until 1820. The ice sheet covering it is millions of years old. How could a 16th century map show the continent's true coastline? Piri Reis claimed he compiled it from older maps that no longer exist, maps that might date to before the ice-covered Antarctica, before the Younger Dryas impact. The evidence keeps accumulating. Underwater structures off the coast of Japan, stone formations near Yonaguni that appear artificial, steps, terraces, right angles. Mainstream geologists argue they're natural, erosion patterns that coincidentally look man-made. But Masaki Kimura, a marine geologist who studied the site for decades, believes they're carved, modified by human hands, submerged when sea levels rose. The depth indicates they were above water around 10,000 years ago, right after the Younger Dryas. Dwarka, off the coast of India, presents similar questions. Sonar surveys reveal structures 40 meters underwater. Stone walls, foundations, artifacts recovered from the site date to 7,500 BCE. Ancient texts describe Dwarka as a magnificent city that sank beneath the waves. For centuries, scholars assumed the story was legend. Then marine archaeologists found it, exactly where the text said it would be. How much of what we call mythology is actually lost history? The ancient texts describe a world that ended, a civilization that fell, knowledge that scattered, and survivors who tried to rebuild. The geological evidence supports catastrophe on a global scale. Impact, fire, flood, darkness, mass extinction, rapid climate change. The timing matches. The descriptions match. The only question is what existed before the catastrophe. Were humans just beginning to organize into small groups? Or had they already achieved something greater? Something lost when the world burned? We stand at a unique moment in history. Technology finally allows us to investigate these questions properly. Ground-penetrating radar, deep-sea submersibles, satellite imaging, genetic analysis, ice core samples. Every year brings new discoveries that challenge established timelines. Göbekli Tepe wasn't supposed to exist. Gunung Padang shouldn't be 20,000 years old. The Younger Dryas boundary layer wasn't predicted by existing models. Each finding forces revision of what we thought we knew. And each revision brings us closer to understanding what the ancient texts have been saying all along. Something happened, something catastrophic, something that reset human civilization. The texts weren't written to deceive. They were written to remember, to preserve the memory of what was lost, to warn future generations that it could happen again. Because it will. Comets return, impact events recur. The geological record shows multiple extinction events. The Younger Dryas wasn't unique. It was just the most recent one that affected human populations large enough to leave written records. Before that, 74,000 years ago, the Toba supervolcano nearly wiped out humanity. Genetic evidence shows a population bottleneck. All modern humans descend from perhaps 10,000 survivors. Before that, the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs 66 million years ago. The pattern repeats: catastrophe, survival, rebuilding, forgetting, until the next event. The ancient texts tell us to remember, to watch the skies, to recognize that our existence is fragile, that everything we've built could disappear as completely as whatever came before. The Younger Dryas survivors carried their stories forward, encoded them in myth, carved them in stone, passed them through generations, hoping we would eventually understand, not just that catastrophe happened, but that it will happen again. And when it does, will we be ready? Or will our descendants sift through our ruins, wondering how we achieved so much and lost it all? Do you think ancient civilizations possess knowledge we've lost? Should we take ancient texts more literally as historical records? The debate continues. Mainstream archaeology maintains that complex civilization began around 6,000 years ago, that everything before was simple hunter-gatherer societies, that the texts are mythology, not history. But the evidence suggests otherwise. The geological markers, the underwater ruins, the impossible constructions, the astronomical knowledge, the mathematical precision, the sophisticated understanding of planetary cycles. These weren't achieved by people just learning to farm. They suggest something older, something lost, something the texts describe but we've failed to recognize. If forgotten chapters of human history fascinate you, subscribe to Veiled Origin. Your support helps uncover stories mainstream archaeology overlooks. This is Veiled Origin, where ancient texts meet modern evidence, and the past refuses to stay buried. The question isn't whether catastrophe happened. The geological evidence proves it did. The question is what existed before, and why every ancient culture tells the same story. Fire from above, water covering the land, sky darkening, the world ending and beginning again. These aren't coincidences, they're memories, preserved in the only way available to people without writing, through their voices and determination to remember. The survivors faced an unimaginable task, rebuilding from fragments, their cities destroyed or submerged, their knowledge existing only in the minds of those who remained. So they encoded warnings in stories, in monuments, in star alignments that would survive millennia, hoping someone would eventually understand. We're beginning to understand. The evidence is mounting. The timeline is shifting. The ancient texts weren't fairy tales. They were testimony, written by people who saw an entire world ending. Their descendants built Göbekli Tepe, erected standing stones across Europe, calculated planetary orbits in Mesoamerica, mapped Antarctica before ice covered it. These achievements were echoes of something older, something lost, something the texts remember even if we've forgotten. The Younger Dryas impact wasn't the end of history. It was a reset, a catastrophic event that forced humanity to start over. But we didn't start from zero. We started from memory, fragmented, distorted by time and retelling, but persistent. The memory that we once knew more, that we once built greater, that we once understood the cosmos in ways we're only now relearning. And that knowledge came with a warning. Watch the sky. Remember what happened. Prepare for when it happens again. Because it will happen again. Comets return on predictable cycles. Objects in the Kuiper Belt, the Oort cloud, any could be sent on a trajectory toward Earth. Will we be ready? Will we have the technology to deflect it? Or will our descendants dig through our ruins, wondering if we knew, if we remembered, if we prepared? The ancient texts say we were warned before. Noah, Utnapishtim, Manu, Deucalion, different names, same narrative. Build something to survive the flood, preserve the knowledge, rebuild. Were these literal instructions? The geological evidence suggests both. The flood happened, the survival happened, the rebuilding happened, and the memory persisted. Modern science is beginning to take the text seriously, not as mythology, but as historical records. Australian Aboriginal stories describe coastlines now underwater, dated to 10,000 years ago, proven accurate. If those stories are reliable, why not the flood narratives? Why not the descriptions of fire from the sky? Why not the accounts of lost civilizations? The resistance to these ideas is understandable. Accepting them means rewriting textbooks, acknowledging that ancient people knew things we've only recently discovered. It means admitting our understanding is incomplete, but the evidence keeps accumulating. The boundary layer, the underwater ruins, the impossible constructions, the astronomical knowledge, all pointing to the same conclusion. Something happened, something we've forgotten, something the ancient texts remember. Should we listen to what the ancients tried to tell us? Should we take their warnings seriously? Or should we continue assuming we're the first, the most advanced, the pinnacle of human achievement? The choice will define how we face the future. Because the next impact isn't a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And when it comes, will we be the civilization that survived, that prepared, that remembered, or will we be another layer in the geological record? Another mysterious boundary that future archaeologists puzzle over? Another collection of texts that future scholars dismiss as mythology? Another lost civilization that tried to warn the next one and failed? If ancient mysteries and forgotten catastrophes intrigue you, subscribe to Veiled Origin for more investigations into what history overlooked. This is Veiled Origin, where the past speaks if we're willing to listen.